All right, so in this final video, I just want to provide some additional tips for things you can do to kind of maximize your learning. So we've talked about effective study strategies, good note taking, actively reading. These are kind of keys to success, but they're not the only ingredients that are going to help you reach your full learning potential. So that's where I wanted to provide just a few tips for things that I think you should consider kind of blending into your routine. So the first tip I have to maximize your learning is really to come to class prepared, prepare for class. So, I think we sometimes, I'll see students, and this was probably me, I would say class is at 8, I would kind of show up at 8 o'clock and really sometimes not have a good understanding of what we were going to be doing that day or what we were even going to be covering, right? And then I would find myself maybe 20 minutes in, my head was kind of spinning. I was trying frantically to keep up with what we were covering. And I think I found that when I started to do a little bit of upfront work to prep for the session, I just got more out of the time I spent in class and generally felt a little less overwhelmed, right? So how would I prep for class? One thing is I would spend a little bit of time reviewing what was covered during the last session. So if I took notes, hopefully I took good notes in the last section, I would go back through my notes and then I would maybe jot down some questions that I might have had from the last session, right? And that's, again, a nice way to make sure that I'm comfortable with what was covered before my instructor moves forward, right? The other one is preview what's going to be covered that session in class. So a lot of times, if you look in the syllabus or there's a course schedule, it'll have a list of topics. And let's say you're going to be talking about, you look at the syllabus and it's going to be talking about, muscle function today, right? That's going to be the topic. Maybe you're taking a physiology class, muscle structure and function, right? And if there's a chapter assigned to that in my textbook, I would spend a little bit of time, prepping and previewing what's going to be some of the core concepts that are likely going to be discussed in that class section. So, it can be as simple as, 5 to 10 minutes, open your textbook, read the headings and subheadings. If there's a chapter, or look at the figures, diagrams. If there's a summary and an abstract in the chapter, maybe read those. Because again, you're not going to have all the detail at that point, but it's going to prime your brain for what's coming during class. And again, that can help you from get to the point where at least it's not your first time seeing a lot of these concepts, or at least hearing a lot of these terms. You've had some exposure to them, helps you kind of stay out of that pattern of just kind of feeling overwhelmed in class and feel like you're frantically trying to keep up. The other thing that there is some evidence for is even attempting questions, which is when students always look at me kind of strange when I mention this, but we talked about a little bit about the testing effect, how, answering questions is a great way to promote learning, right? The testing effect even extends to trying to answer questions before you've even been exposed to the material. It'd be like if you go to your textbook and you've got some sample questions at the back of the chapter, there might be some benefit to even just trying to answer those questions. You probably won't be able to answer them correctly, right? Because you haven't discussed the topic in class today, yet. But just trying to answer questions before you go to class will kind of, again, prime your brain for what are some of the key concepts, what are some of the terms that I'm going to be seeing and stuff like that. So it's something to try. Again, this is one where sometimes some students find it helpful, others don't. I think there's some evidence that it can help with longer term learning, but something to try out. But I would definitely, at minimum, review what was talked about last session and then preview what's going to be talked about in the next session by looking at the chapter or even a short video on the topic, just to kind of give you a primer for what you're going to be discussing. All right, so my tip number 2 is learn from exams, right? Or really any kind of assessments, practicals, anything like that. So I think as a student, I viewed it as like exams were like the being of my existence, right? It was like, oh, these are just things I need to get through and I pass them and I just move forward. And the reality is that was a missed opportunity, right? Again, the goal is to learn, not just pass an exam and move on. So you learn a lot when you review your exams, right? So again, don't miss that opportunity. So, regardless of how you did, if you did well, if you did poorly, whatever, go back and meet with your instructor. Maybe they have a structured exam review in class. That's great. If they don't, ask to see your exam and ask to go through it, right? Because even if you did well, right? Going back and reviewing your exam a few days later, right, can be another form of exposure to it after, you've had a little time to forget some of the information, right? So it can actually help you actually learn the material moving forward. The other thing is when you review, you can ask for clarification about certain concepts, because sometimes, and I would say review all the questions, not just the ones you got wrong. Spend a little time with each question, right? Because there are some times on an exam where you maybe really didn't understand the concept. You may have just guessed and got it right, or you maybe got down to 2 answers and you picked one, and sometimes you get it wrong and you review it. But even if you got it right, you should probably spend a little time with that question to really understand why the answer you kind of lucked into was correct, right? And most instructors are going to be happy to sit down and review your exam with you, as long as you're not kind of arguing for points, right? If you're arguing about your score and stuff like that, that's a lot of times a turnoff for instructors. But if you're sitting down and you're genuinely trying to review so that you can learn the material, most instructors, probably all instructors, are going to be happy to do that with you, right? The other thing, you can look for patterns in your performance, right? So sometimes you'll see, and you can get an idea of the types of questions you may be missing. Maybe you are pretty good with the questions that really ask you about just your general understanding, require you to have a general understanding of the topic. But when there's questions that require you to move on to application, you may really struggle with those. Well, if you start to pick up on that pattern when you review your exams, you may say, I may need to tweak the way I study to make sure I build in more, push myself to that higher level where I might, look for application opportunities, or I might have to come up with examples, because those are the types of questions that I'm kind of consistently missing when I take an exam. Again, if you don't review, you're probably not going to be able to gain those types of insights. So again, seeing your exams as more of a learning opportunity than a barrier, I think can be a really good step. My tip number 3 is establish effective study groups, right? When you're in, especially a lot of the health professions programs, they're kind of these cohort models where you progress through classes together as a group, you take the same courses, and it's good to kind of establish these kind of effective learning communities. And I think study group can be a great way to do that, right? Because again, you don't have to do it alone, right? We learn better together. Everybody has their different strengths. Everybody conceptualizes information in different ways. So it's good to be able to leverage those, the strengths of your friends and the strengths of your group mates, and the strengths and the way they conceptualize information. So again, it's a chance for you to learn from others and also explain concepts. So you may be in your group study session and you may be the one explaining something. Well, yes, it's going to benefit your classmates if they can hear your explanation, but it's also going to benefit you if you're trying to teach someone something, right? That's going to be a great way for you to support your own learning. Your classmates in a group, or your study group, can also be a great source of support, right? It can help to keep you on task, maybe reminders about, hey, remember, we've got this exam coming up next week. We should probably study together, do our study session. Or, hey, remember this is due, or we've got this event coming up, whatever it may be. Your study group can kind of keep you on task and also keep you motivated, right? They can be that positive support group for you. It also allows for active learning opportunities, things like meeting together to draw out a concept map, or to meet together to share different examples and talk through different examples you may have all come up with. Those are great active learning activities that can be effectively done in a group. So I would say not all groups, study groups, are effective though. So a few tips. Establish your expectations, right? Because sometimes it can create rifts within, classmates, peers, if there's inconsistent expectations about what the session's going to entail and what people should have done beforehand to make it an effective study session. So for instance, if you had a group of 3, and usually I think of study groups, I usually want to see like groups of 2 to 3, or maybe 4 at most. If you have too many people, all of a sudden there's just not many opportunities for everybody to stay engaged, right? You start to lose people. So I would say, 3 to 4 in my mind is probably the optimal, right? So you've got your groups, and let's say one of you is expecting to have come and read the chapter, reviewed your notes, read the chapter, and came up with some examples. And then others just come up and they really haven't done any of the readings for the course and they haven't reviewed their notes yet. All of a sudden, it's not going to be a productive session because there's just not consistent expectations about what we were going to do when we were meeting, right? So I think establishing the expectations for what people will have done ahead of time and what the session is going to look like can make for more effective study groups. And I think even creating an agenda, we're going to spend 20 minutes, doing some concept mapping for some of these processes we discussed in class. Then we're going to move towards reviewing some practice exam questions that we were given to kind of start to figure out why one answer was correct and the other answers weren't, whatever it may be, right? Instead of an agenda, because that also it creates time boundaries, right? Where it says, hey, we're going to meet and study for an hour and a half, and we're going to spend an hour on this, half hour on this, right? That helps to kind of keep things on track a little bit, because sometimes study groups can become ineffective when you're meeting and it becomes more about socializing. I'm not saying it's not a great thing to socialize, but if you've designated time to study, you don't want socializing or venting about classes or instructors to kind of take over that time. You can do that other times where your time that's not devoted to your studying. The other thing that can be helpful is to kind of assign a leader for the session, and it can rotate. It doesn't always have to be the same person, but this is the person that kind of keeps track of the agenda and say, when they start to see that the session is going off the rails a little bit, they can say, remember, hey, let's make sure we focus here. We've got 30 more minutes and then we'll be done, and then we can talk about what we're going to do this weekend or whatever it may be, right? And I would even say this, I think a lot of times people tend to study with their friends. And that's great if you can study with your friends and the sessions are productive and you all have consistent approaches and it just works out and there's a lot of harmony. But it doesn't have to be your friend group that is your study group. Sometimes you effectively study with people, but they're not the people that you're gonna go to the ball game with on Sunday or something like that. That's not. Doesn't always have to be the same people, right? It's about finding those group of people that are gonna stick to the plan as far as do what they need to do ahead of time to make sure that the session is productive. They're going to push each other in positive ways to learn, and they're really serious about their studies, right? You want to find those people. Those may or may not be your friends, right? And the last tip, and this is a really important one, prioritize your mental and physical health. So health profession students, there's a lot of information about how a lot of times they tend to neglect their personal health. They'll stop being physically active. They maybe will adopt poor eating habits. They'll won't get enough sleep, and that can be problematic because you're really not going to maximize your learning if you're not taking care of yourself, right? So I always and it's hard. I get it. You've got a lot of classes. There's a lot of things biting for your time. There's only so many hours in the day. So what I recommend is setting a clear plan for your time, right? Good time management, I think, can help you limit some of the mental stressors, and then also help you maintain some good physical activity habits or physical habits, right? So to protect your mental and physical health. So things like, a lot of times I talk with students and they'll come in and they'll say, I don't have any time in the day for myself, right? And I've had students that'll say, I wish I could just go for a run, or I wish I could just go to the gym even for a half hour, just because I think, I get a lot of energy when I start to be physically active and stuff like that, or I'm not even finding time to be able to do my grocery shopping or something like that. And what I would do is I would then, if those things are a priority, which they definitely are, I would look at your schedule and make sure you put those things in your planner. Schedule those things. Schedule time for physical activity. Schedule time for taking care of routine tasks like your laundry. Schedule time for grocery shopping. Schedule time for dinner and meal prep and those kinds of things. Again, if you don't budget your time, if you don't put those things in your planner or in your schedule, the tendency will be for studying to just kind of eat up every minute of the day, right? So I always tell students, I think it's a good idea to kind of explicitly put those things in your planner. And to be honest, that was a big thing that helped me along the way. I was really struggling when I first got to graduate school, felt like I didn't have any time. I'd been very physically active, and I really enjoyed being physically active as an undergraduate, and I had generally decent dietary habits and stuff like that. And then when I went to grad school, I was just like, I don't have any time, right? And I started to notice that I just wasn't as healthy and happy as I wanted to be. So I said, listen, I need to prioritize my health. So I would do things like I said, schedule in a time for physical activity. So I would put it into my planner and I would stick with it, right? Even if I was like, oh my God, I have an exam tomorrow. I probably shouldn't go on that run that I wanted to go on. I would do it anyway. I would go on that run. And what I found is that if I spent 30 minutes, I go for a run, I take a shower, I get cleaned up, and then I go back to study, I found that I just had more energy and a little bit more mental clarity. So I was like, yes, that 30 minutes or an hour to be active, yeah, it was time I wasn't studying, but it allowed me to be more productive when I actually did go back to try to study. I just felt like I came with a little more clarity and was a little more fresh. Even scheduling time for non-school tasks and connecting with family, right? Again, if you don't put it in your planner or you don't put it in your schedule, sometimes it just won't happen, right? So that's where I'd have a little, in my, it's a little later, so I didn't have a digital planner, but I just had my pen and paper, right? That I had my planner, and I would put in things like be physically active, remember to call so and so. On Sundays, I would say make sure I get my laundry done and do my grocery shopping and meal prep for the week. Again, I had to budget that time because if I didn't, my all the time in my day would just get eaten up by studying, right, or class stuff. The other thing is I set rules for myself. And so again, I'm just giving you these examples. This may not be exactly what works for you, but it helped me is to set rules for myself that I knew I could live by. So for instance, I said, all right, I'm not going to study after 10 o'clock at night. Because what I found is that if I studied late at night, I wasn't really getting much out of the sessions. I would wake up really tired the next day. Sometimes my mind would race at night and stuff like that. So I said, I'm going to stop studying at 10 o'clock, start to unwind so I can get to bed at a decent time and be alert for class the next day, right? So in doing that, and I followed those rules, right? I would just be like 10 o'clock, that seems reasonable to me. So even if I had the exam the next day, I would feel this kind of urge to want to keep studying, but I would say, nope, 10 o'clock. I knew I could live by that, right? And again, what I found is that I just, had a little bit more energy the next day. I wasn't as burned out. I wasn't as stressed all the time and stuff like that because I was getting a decent amount of sleep again, right? So again, these are the kind of things, and again, I'm not saying 10 o'clock is what you should do or that's the rule you should follow, but I think being explicit about scheduling things that are important for your health and wellness, and then setting certain rules for yourself that you can live by can help to make school a little bit more manageable, where you feel like you don't have to make such a compromise for your health and wellness. And the last thing I would say, if you're really struggling with, especially your mental health, make sure you reach out to somebody. There's a lot of great people out there that are want to help you, and that's what they're there for. So make sure you're not trying to do it alone. These are some general tips for just a way to make your life a little more manageable. But if you're really struggling, there are certainly people out there that you want to reach out to that can give you some support. All right, I hope you found these tips helpful. And again, I think pairing these with the study strategies and note taking and active reading and those kind of things is really a really great recipe for academic success.
If you enjoyed this content, be sure to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel, Learning That Lasts, and check out my book, Learning That Lasts, which is available on Amazon.